On the evening of August 30th, 1939, the German superliner SS Bremen, one of the fastest liners in the world, left New York Harbor for the last time. But as night fell and the superliner slipped out of view, the great ship's nameplates were painted over, and she went into a total blackout. Her course was abruptly shifted north. Mattresses and cans of fuel were brought to her promenade deck so she could be set ablaze and scuttled at a moment's notice. Two British warships, HMS Barrack and York, were waiting in Halifax, ready to intercept her. Bremen's radio operators silently listened for any signs of the enemy warships as they sailed dangerously close. If Bremen was spotted, the cruisers could easily seize or destroy the valuable liner the moment war broke out. Then, on September 1st, 1939, Bremen's crew got the news they feared. The German army had marched on Poland. Soon the world would once again be at war. They were thousands of miles from safety. Their giant ship, the pride of Germany's merchant fleet, was a valuable target, and Great Britain was eager to prevent her from ever reaching home. I'd like to take a moment to talk about the sponsor of this portion of today's video, World of Warships Legends. It's impossible to fully appreciate Bremen's incredible escape without understanding the Royal Navy cruisers she evaded on her dash across the Atlantic. It's one thing to read about naval battles, it's another thing to take part in one. If you want to know what it's like to hunt down and destroy enemy ships, now is your chance with World of Warships Legends. World of Warships Legends is a massive multiplayer, free-to-play console game that lets you control over 400 historical ships from the First and Second World Wars in stunning lifelike worlds. You can choose your favorite class of ship, whether it be destroyers, battleships, cruisers, or even aircraft carriers. Join more than 8 million players and take part in team-based battles. And now World of Warships is teaming up with World of Tanks Modern Armor for the new free-to-download Unlimited Force DLC. With awesome new ships and tanks, including the French Tier 2 Premium Destroyer Ensign Cavall, which I can't wait to get my hands on. And World of Tanks players will get access to the British Tier 5 Premium Heavy Tank Excelsior for the all-new Can't Miss Winterfest special event. World of Warships Legends is ringing in the new year with an incredible welcome pack. New players get access to the American Tier 3 Premium Battleship Arkansas, the German Tier 3 Cruiser Karlsruhe, 7 days of premium account access, 5 common crates, 10 red, white, and blue camouflages, 10 hunter camouflages, 2 Spectral Vault 2.0 crates with high chances of dropping a premium ship, and a special event currency which you can spend on the new content. Use the link below to download World of Warships Legends and join the battle today. The First World War decimated Germany's merchant shipping fleet. The 3 largest ships in the world, Albert Ballen's Imperator, Vaterland, and Bismarck, all survived the war, but they were seized by Great Britain and the United States as war reparations to make up for tonnage lost, including the Lusitania and the Britannic. Immediately following the war, none of the European powers were in the economic position to resume the feverish building that characterized the pre-war shipping boom. This meant that Britain's Mauretania comfortably maintained her speed record for several years. But Germany was eager to overcome the economic devastation they suffered after the war. In the fall of 1926, North German Lloyd ordered a pair of superliners that would re-establish a premier German transatlantic shipping service. The 2 nearly identical ships were constructed simultaneously at the AG Weisser Yard in Bremen and Blumenwas in Hamburg. The ships were designed to prioritize speed over size, with the ultimate goal of recapturing the Blue Ribbon for Germany. The twin ships, Bremen and Europa, incorporated a radical new streamlined design to achieve that goal. They had a low silhouette with raked bows and short, stubby funnels that resembled destroyers more than contemporary luxury liners. Their designers were obsessed with creating hulls that produced as little drag as possible. Their hullplate edges faced forward rather than aft, and they incorporated a streamlined rudder that was meant to produce better maneuverability at high speeds. Finally, the Bremen and the Europa were the first merchant ships to incorporate the Taylor bulbous bow, an innovation developed and used only by the United States Navy at the time, though today it's standard. The two ships' interiors were a luxurious example of the popular late 1920s German New Objectivity design movement. The style, similar to Bauhaus but less extreme, prioritized function and marked a sharp turn toward modernism. President Paul von Hindenburg launched the Bremen on August 16, 1928, only one day after her sister ship Europa. Though the Europa was originally intended to sail first, a fire occurred during her fitting out process that delayed her maiden voyage by several months. This allowed Bremen to take the lead. She was powered by 4 geared steam turbine engines that could generate 135,000 shaft horsepower, driving 4 propellers. She had a cruising speed of 27.5 knots, and it was said that during her sea trials she briefly reached an astonishing 32 knots. She came in at 51,656 gross registered tons, and measured 938.6 feet or 286 meters in length, with a beam of 101.9 feet or 31 meters. She could carry 2,139 passengers and 966 crew. Bremen was meant to showcase all things modern. A seaplane launch was fitted between her funnels that could deliver mail to her destination a day early, but the device was mostly just a novelty built to garner publicity. Her maiden voyage took place in July 1929, and though it got off to a rough start due to fog, she was soon able to come up to her full speed. She reached the Ambrose lightship in 4 days, 17 hours, and 42 minutes, a full 8 hours faster than the Mauritania's previous speed record. She sailed into New York to much fanfare and celebration. The Bremen and her crew had a fond relationship with the city, and the ship proved popular with passengers. Europa would join her sister the following March, and the older and smaller SS Columbus rounded out Germany's transatlantic service. By 1932, the 3 liners captured more than 12% of the North Atlantic passenger trade. But the rise of fascism in Germany soon put a strain on Bremen's popularity. The Bremen's popularity with international travelers dropped after Adolf Hitler rose to power in 1933. The decline in popularity accelerated when the Nazi Party introduced cadres of SA stormtroopers on all German passenger ships. As was the case with the German population back at home, Nazi sentiment among the Bremen's crew ranged from quiet discomfort to intense party loyalty. After 1936, all German passenger ships were purged of foreign crew, and SA staff were deployed through various functions including stewards, waiters, and galley staff. The Bremen had 150 SA officers among her crew. Bremen's first captain, Leopold Ziegenbein, resisted the Nazi infestation of his ship, and he refused to end his correspondence with the required salutation Heil Hitler. He eventually elected to take an early retirement in 1936, stating that he couldn't in good conscience represent that party abroad. He was replaced by Adolf Ahrens, who captained the Columbus previously. He was experienced with the Bremen, frequently subbing for Ziegenbein before his retirement. Ahrens was not a Nazi loyalist. His allegiances were primarily to his ship, his crew, and his country. But while many of the party's actions made him uncomfortable, ultimately he followed orders and didn't resist. Though the United States had a large German-American population, tensions rose rapidly due to the Nazi Party's aggressive nationalist policies and rhetoric. It was the express policy of the North German Lloyd Line that, to attract international travelers, Nazism would be downplayed as much as possible on their ships. But the Bremen, like all other German liners, was required to fly the Nazi flag. This made the liner a target for anti-Nazi protests. In July 1935, protesters rushed the ship, tore down the Nazi flag, and threw it into the Hudson. Since Germany at the time had two official national flags, the swastika and the black and white and red flag of the German Empire, US authorities decided that no symbol of Germany had been harmed. Hell yeah. Hitler was so enraged by the incident that he made the swastika the official national flag of Germany on September 15, 1935. Further demonstrations took place on board after Germany's involvement in the Spanish Civil War in 1936, and the Nazi flag was torn down at least 2 more times by 1938. By 1939, tensions were running at a breaking point. It was becoming clear that war was inevitable. On August 22, 1939, the Bremen departed Bremerhaven for her final passenger voyage. She carried 1,770 passengers on board, mostly consisting of US nationals looking to escape Europe before tensions boiled over. A few days into the voyage, on August 26th, the Kriegsmarine High Command ordered all German merchant ships to don camouflage paint and head immediately to German ports. But Captain Ahrens defied the message, choosing instead to complete the voyage as scheduled and deliver his passengers to New York. A message was transmitted to Germany defying the order for radio silence. It informed the High Command that Bremen would continue to New York and then proceed to Havana for safety. The message was a deliberate ploy to throw the US and the Royal Navy off her trail. Bremen entered New York Harbor at 6 p.m. on Monday, August 28th, and docked at her usual spot at Pier 86. Captain Ahrens and his crew intended to depart as soon as the ship could be refueled. But US authorities had direct orders from President Franklin Roosevelt to do whatever they could to keep the valuable liner in New York. By late August 1933, the United States was well aware that war was all but certain in Europe. From the outset, the United States was officially neutral, and the American public was fiercely isolationist, with only 8% of the population in favor of joining the war even by July of 1940. Nevertheless, the government was dedicated to quietly supporting their allies, and coordinated closely with the Royal Navy. President Franklin Roosevelt, who served as Assistant Secretary of the Navy under Woodrow Wilson during World War I, was keenly aware of the very real threat Germany could pose in the Atlantic. He remembered Germany's conversion of the passenger liner SS Kaiser Wilhelm de Gross to an auxiliary cruiser in World War I. There was genuine concern that powerful liners like Bremen could be quickly armed and pose a major threat to US merchant shipping as they transported vital supplies to Europe. Intelligence reports even suggested that ships like Bremen had armaments hidden in unlikely places, such as the floor beneath her pool. The concern was that once war was declared, the crew would quickly arm the ship at sea and wreak havoc on unprepared US ships within hours. Whether or not these suspicions were true, it was clearly to the Royal Navy's advantage to reduce German naval tonnage, or, better yet, reserve the ship in New York until she could be requisitioned for the Allied war effort. After all, Roosevelt was always confident that the United States would eventually be pulled into the war. So when the Bremen docked at Pier 86, US authorities were ordered by Roosevelt himself to delay her departure as long as possible. This was tricky because war had yet to be declared, so the US had no reason to keep the ship from leaving long term. So they got creative. New York Harbor was known for efficient turnarounds, but when the Bremen requested refueling, the process just happened to be delayed. Authorities conducted extensive searches of the ship, looking for any evidence of hidden armaments. They dug out the process by taking several long coffee and lunch breaks. Bremen was also required to demonstrate her compliance with US safety regulations, even though the ship intended to leave New York without any passengers. Every life jacket was inspected, and all 26 of her motorized lifeboats had to be lowered to demonstrate that they were all in proper working condition. The mood on board was tense. Captain Ahrens even considered the possibility that they would have to make an unauthorized break for it. But an unguided departure from the busy New York Harbor would have been an incredibly dangerous situation. Even if the ship could manage to clear the pier without the aid of tugs, The US Coast Guard would almost certainly intercept them before they could leave the harbor. So the captain and his crew humored authorities as they slowly ran out of reasons to hold the ship. He also ordered sunscreen and other provisions to prepare for a trip to Havana. He had reams of black paper purchased from an art supply store that could be used to black out windows. Finally, on the evening of August 30th, authorities had run out of reasons to delay the ship. The Bremen was finally authorized for departure. At 6:30 p.m., she left New York Harbor for the last time. Her crew dipped her colors in salute and waved a fond goodbye to the crew of the Normandy. The two great liners knew each other well, frequently docked side by side in New York. They didn't know at the time that the two ships would meet similar fates. As she sailed past the Statue of Liberty, her band played the Nazi Party anthem while her crew sang along, their arms extended in the Nazi salute. They sailed out of New York into a dense fog, their destination a complete mystery to the rest of the world.
We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender.
After dropping off the New York Harbor pilot, Bremen continued steaming southeast into the foggy mist of the Atlantic. When she reached the outer limits of U.S. territorial waters, Captain Arens commanded all topside lighting extinguished, including her navigational running lights. As the lights of the United States coast disappeared into the fog, the ship was plunged into darkness. Lookouts were increased to 26, and after a few moments, Captain Arens ordered a new course of 040 degrees. Havana was just a decoy. Bremen took a sharp turn northeast, bound for her home port in Germany. As the covert voyage began, the crew was ordered to bring all mattresses from tourist class to the promenade deck and place petrol every 20 meters. If they were intercepted by a British warship, Captain Arens was prepared to immediately scuttle the ship. The plan was that once a majority of the crew evacuated in the lifeboats, a designated group of firemen would set the ship ablaze, while another designated engineering party would open the seacocks and flood the ship. The captain, chief engineer, and first officer would be the last to leave. As they sailed off the coast of Nantucket, the weather grew worse. The poor visibility was an asset, making the liner harder to spot by nearby ships and grounding patrolling seaplanes. Crews quartered in the forward section of the ship were moved aft, considering the danger of sailing at full speed with low visibility and full blackout. Soon Bremen received word that Germany and the Soviet Union had signed a non-aggression pact on August 23rd. They received a coded message from High Command instructing them to sail for the Russian port of Murmansk. Despite her speed, over 27 knots, the crew went to work painting the entire ship a ghostly gray to help further reduce their visibility. The crew used ropes to lift themselves up her bright yellow funnels, quickly painting them a sloppy gray. They used the lifeboats to paint her sides. Her radio operators listened carefully for signs of nearby ships. When others were detected, Captain Arens would abruptly alter course to avoid coming within visual range. As they passed Halifax, they came dangerously close to HMS Berwick, HMS York, and U.S. Coast Guard ship George W. Campbell. Bremen's radio operators took careful steps to track the ships as they silently slipped by. On September 1st, 1939, Bremen got the news that they were dreading. German troops had marched into Poland. Captain Arens, remembering the devastation of the last Great War, reacted with great sadness, fearing another war would once again bring destruction to his country. But now his primary concern was getting his crew and his ship to safety. War was declared by Britain and France on Nazi Germany on September 3rd. The crew of the Bremen had good reason to fear an encounter with the British warship. Only hours after war was declared, the German U-boat U-30, having just received word that a state of war existed with Britain, spotted the 14,000-ton British-flagged passenger ship Athenia. She was bound for Montreal and carried 1,410 passengers. U-30 fired 2 torpedoes at the Athenia in the first action of the war at sea. One struck at her port beam. The second misfired. Passengers on the Athenia thought the second torpedo's explosion was the U-boat opening fire from her deck guns on the stricken liner as she began listing to port. She would take 14 hours to sink. 118 people lost their lives, including 16 children and 22 Americans. Though the crew of the U-boat thought that they were firing on a commerce raider, the action was interpreted by the Allies as a sign that Germany had adopted a policy of unrestricted war at sea. The Bremen would now be an even greater prize for any captain of the Royal Navy. Bremen raced for the Denmark Strait. The crew was unprepared for the cold temperatures and took clothing that would normally be sold to passengers in the ship's store to keep themselves warm. On September 6th, as Bremen entered Russian waters, her crew spotted a plume of smoke low on the waterline. She reversed direction and quickly outrun the oncoming warship, but when they realized that it was a Russian torpedo boat, they resumed course and rendezvoused with the Soviet ship. A group of Soviet officers boarded the Bremen, and after some awkward attempts at communication in broken English, a Russian-speaking steward was brought to the bridge to translate. Bremen dropped anchor in Murmansk later that day, having traveled 4,045 nautical miles since leaving New York 6 days and 13 hours prior. It was an unfamiliar port with an unlikely ally, but for now, Bremen was safe. In Murmansk, Bremen's crew had little to do but wait. The port city, though busy with German shipping, was mostly unfinished. On September 18th, 850 of Bremen's crew were sent home to Germany by rail, leaving just a skeleton crew of 70 to maintain the ship. By the end of September, a German tanker arrived to replenish their fuel. The mood in the port city continued to deteriorate when war broke out between the Soviet Union and Finland on November 30th. Finnish air raids struck dangerously close, and the Soviets ordered all ships in the harbor to darken their lights. Captain Ahrens waited patiently for an opportunity to escape the Soviet port. Finally, before dawn on the morning of December 7th, the Bremen's skeleton crew pulled the liner out of Murmansk under the cover of a heavy snowstorm. On December 12th, she was intercepted by the British submarine Salmon off the Norwegian coast. In a tense exchange, the submarine surfaced and issued repeated warnings to the Bremen to surrender. But before any action could be taken, the Salmon was forced to crash dive when a German Dornier flying boat appeared on the horizon, sent by the Kriegsmarine to escort the Bremen. Finally, on December 13th, the Bremen made it to her home port in Bremerhaven. There she received a hero's welcome. Captain Adolf Ahrens was promoted to Commodore and celebrated by the German press. The covert voyage was an unlikely success. After numerous near misses, lucky breaks, and truly impressive evasive actions from her entire crew, the Bremen was safe in Germany. But the efforts of so many ultimately proved fruitless. Over the next several months, the Bremen was refitted as troopship number 802 in preparation for Operation Sea Lion, the German invasion of Great Britain. But those plans ultimately never came to fruition. On March 16, 1941, a fire broke out in her wood-paneled dining room, which was being used to store mattresses. The fire spread rapidly through the ship despite the crew's efforts to bring the blaze under control. Soon, Bremen began listing dangerously. To prevent her from capsizing, she was flooded and came to rest in the shallow water of the Weser River. It was initially suspected that the fire was set by British saboteurs, but upon further investigation, it was found that it was set by a 15-year-old deckhand named Walter Schmidt. The boy confessed that he set the fire after being beaten by his supervisor. He was brutally executed soon after. Portions of the hull were scrapped for war munitions over the next few years. The rest of the ship was towed upriver and further dismantled between 1952 and 1956, though portions of the hull are apparently still visible to this day. The whole ordeal was a pathetic end for one of the greatest ocean liners ever built. The Bremen and the Europa were revolutionary and widely beloved ships. Overnight, they reignited the race to dominate the Atlantic passenger trade and rekindled the building frenzy that had been stalled since World War I. They were immensely popular and offered a glimmer of hope for a Germany eager to rebuild before the Nazi Party dimmed their success. To me, Bremen represents Germany in the interwar era. She was built by the Weimar Republic, a country with something to prove and endless potential for a peaceful and prosperous future. A country that would be overrun by extremists. Ocean liners carry the spirit of their nation. Bremen set out with something to prove, and she was truly revolutionary. But her potential was cut short by the fire that her country unleashed upon the world. A fire that ultimately consumed her. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this one, support the channel with a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you again to World of Warships for supporting the video. Download the game using the link below. I'd like to give a special shout out to my supporters on Patreon and my channel members. Their support helps keep the channel afloat. Alright crew, that's all I've got. Until the next one, be nice to people. Unless they're not to.